And it is my real pleasure to introduce the speakers at our first morning panel. The chair of this session is Professor Michel Piston. We are thankful to have this great experienced legal mind with us. Dr. Piston is a professor of law at Villanova University and offers an extensive background on legal education and refugees. To her left, Armando Borja, with over 25 years of experience being an international development practitioner. Armando has performed extensive development, education, emergency relief, poverty alleviation, and monitoring work all over the world. After 15 years with JRS, he switched to JWL, Jesuit Worldwide Learning, and he's a global director for grants and programs at JWL, Higher Education at the Margins organization. Professor Carrie Bystrom currently lectures at Bard College, Berlin. Her PhD from Princeton University could not get more awards. So we are very pleased to have her. She currently teaches at the intersection of aesthetics and politics on topics ranging from post-colonial studies to trauma and memory studies, human rights, and humanitarianism. And Professor Michael Ondaatje from Australian Catholic University, our good friend. ACU is a member of the network, Refugee and Migrant Education Network. Shyness in front of camera is not a trait for Dr. Ondaatje, as he's been a frequent media commentator. Dr. Ondaatje is National Head of Arts and Professor of History at the ACU. Welcome, and I give the floor to Professor Piston.
Hi, everyone.
So what we're going to do is we have a wonderful array of speakers to talk about educating displaced people. So what I'd like to do is give them each 10 minutes to do a presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions. I'll moderate some questions from here, and then we'll also open it up to the floor. So Armando Borja will be our first presenter.
Good morning. Just give me 1 second so I set up the presentation. Okay, good morning. My name is Armando Borja and I work with Jesuit Worldwide Learning. I oversee the operations of approximately 25 community learning centers that operate in refugee, post-conflict, as well as marginalized communities around the world. For my presentation this morning, I'm going to touch on 3 areas. First, I want to describe Jesuit Worldwide Learning, and you're going to hear me say the word dual for Jesuit Worldwide Learning. Second, I want to highlight a few of Jewel's promising approaches in blended learning, post-secondary and tertiary education. And finally, I'd like to highlight a few evidence-based results showcasing positive, transformative educational outcomes to inform best practices in the sector. But before I share a few thoughts on Jesuit Worldwide Learning, I'd like to do a quick review of the concept of best education practices, and also I'd like to quickly reflect on higher education and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Best practices, that's the topic of this session, refers to a wider range of individual activities, policies, and programmatic approaches to achieve positive changes in student attitudes or academic behaviors. In my presentation, I will describe a few promising approaches Jewel is pursuing to attain this goal. Later, I will share evidence-based changes in attitudes as well as academic behaviors among dual students that could help us compile a set of best practices. Why are best practices important? Because these have the potential to help us scale up in multiple places and contexts. And very briefly also, regarding the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I want to emphasize the unique contribution that tertiary education brings to pretty much all of the various dimensions, starting with sustainable economic growth, poverty reduction, and also the diminishing of inequality. Tertiary education plays a critical role in promoting social mobility through equal educational opportunities for all groups, especially the most vulnerable groups in society that include low income, refugees, displaced, minorities, people with special needs. And in that, let me highlight, yesterday we had a chance to hear from a number of refugees, displaced, migrants who have benefited from international scholarships. I think that international scholarships go to a great length to enhance social mobility. But beyond individual social mobility, the achievement of community-wide sustainable development goals in refugee settings and fragile environments requires well-prepared citizens who care about social and economic inclusion and also environmental sustainability. In a place like the Kakuma refugee camp, and many of us had an opportunity to hear via YouTube yesterday, a YouTube video from Mr. Innocent Shilombo, who, by the way, is a Jesuit Worldwide Learning Diploma graduate. He noted that blended learning allowed the promise of university-level education to be accessible within the confines of the Kakuma refugee camp. Today, many Jesuit Worldwide Learning Diploma graduates lead many aspects within the social fabric of Kakuma. Kakuma is, for many who might not be aware or familiar, is significant. It's a very large refugee camp. About 200,000 refugees live in Kakuma. And those graduates have the opportunity to be leaders in schools. They have started and provided employment opportunities for many, as well as those who have completed many of our programs, and not only our programs, we pioneered the programs there. Today there are many other educational opportunities for refugees in Kakuma, but many of them are actually leading the governance as well as the service delivery that happens in Kakuma as well. So with that brief intro, I'd like to share with you. So I'm going to show you my presentation now. Technology challenge, I feel. Okay. Excellent. So this is the vision that we stand for, and primarily, I'm not going to read it, you can read it yourself, but it's the power, those are the margins, through the provision of higher education, to create a global classroom of learners. And this is pretty much what drives what we do. These are some of the places, and I want to highlight where is it that we decide to set up our community learning centers. And you might not be able to see it, but there is a community, Human Development Index there that will tell you, so it is red or yellowish, the darker it is, the lowest Human Development Index, and this will give you a sense of the kind of places where we are currently operating. And these are our guiding tenets, principles. And I will go into a little bit of detail when I describe to you some of the promising practices, in terms of promising best practices or best approaches that we're trying to put in place. But these are our four core tenets. One is global thinking, strategic partnerships, highest quality. This is extremely important in the field of education. And then, of course, we've in Jesuits talked about the Ignatian experience. And for many who do not know the Ignatian experience, I actually have one slide that summarizes it all. And briefly, this is what we presently offer. Oops. Go back. So we begin with training in global language, in this case English. Most of our programs are in English. We have our core program for many who have studied at Jesuit universities, you know, and I'm sure many other Catholic universities also have a core curriculum, so that's what we have for all studies, the diploma program, and it's a recognized diploma from Regis University. And then if you follow the blue, that's the academic. If you follow the green, that's post-secondary professional courses. Currently, we are working, and we have a representative from South New Hampshire University. We are in the midst of providing opportunities to 150 refugees, 75 in Kakuma. You already spoke where Kakuma is, northern Kenya, but also 75 refugees in Saleka, in Malawi. Many refugees in Malawi from Congo, Burundi, Rwanda. In Saleka you find many whole nationalities. It's the United Nations of Africa, the Kakuma refugee camp. And it's basically a learning pathway that we begin, again, scaffolding, all of the, and perhaps highlighting one of the best practices, all of the academic courses that we provide are fully accredited, and that allows to scaffold, meaning the students complete one phase, and then they're able to transfer and continue the education in the various programs that we offer. And this is, in a nutshell, what Jesuit education is about. It is about a process. And I will just highlight, perhaps, the process of acknowledging the context, realizing experience, reflecting on it, engaging in action, and of course, there is an evaluation, and it's a continuous loop. And something that also makes very unique our blended learning, and for many who are not familiar with blended learning, but blended learning it's online education that is characterized by basically distance education off-site faculty. We have about, in a year, we recruit about 50 faculty members who teach about 200 classes from many schools, perhaps many schools who are represented here, Georgetown, Boston College, Comillas from Spain, and a few other places. And something that has made our program very unique is precisely the investment that we made in developing a particular pedagogy for online education, which is characterized by cognitive apprenticeship, cognitive video, multimedia learning, as well as the Keller Arts model. But moving forward, I only have a few more minutes. But university education, very much for many of the students who are present here, is about that big day when you collect your diploma. And yesterday somebody said, and after having been in Saleka and the Kakuma refugee camp, it's really a family first for many. It's a family, it's a community. It really takes a village for them to graduate. And these are the pictures. And this tells you a little bit where we stand. We have about 250 individuals who have finished. Many of them are continuing their education into a bachelor's program. Presently, we have about 600 enrolled and about 2,500 the students who are pursuing language and other professional opportunities. And for many years, we have worked in close partnership with Jesuit Refugee Service. So these are some of the promising approaches in our learning model. And I'm just going to touch on a few of them very quickly. And when we talk about distance education, when we talk about blended learning, issue of connectivity becomes very relevant. And for us, actually, it's been the issue of lack of connectivity that has become even more relevant. Because independent of technology, and this has been one of the biggest frustrations for many, independent of technology, there is an educational experience that has to be ensured for students. And something that we have managed to accomplish is that we've created a technology in which I would say a significant amount of what we do is offline. And then there is an opportunity to connect, and students connect to submit assignments, get feedback. And I think that mastering and balancing that allows the students to pretty much ensure that whether they have high level of connectivity or whether they have sporadic connectivity, we accomplish the same educational goals. And that's a big item actually for many universities who like to engage in remote distance education. So partnership, we said Star Alliance, and that's actually Star Alliance like United and some of the other ones. It's the idea that you cannot do it all, and you need to do what I've been calling the scaffolding, that many universities offer courses and recognition of multiple universities, not only in the United States. In the United States, of course, we have the accrediting agencies that in some cases make it very difficult, or in some other places make it very complicated. But mutual accreditation and recognition, that is the only way that we're going to make higher education scalable. And certification and academic awards. Yesterday we talked about blockchain and how people have the credentials, but let me just alert you to the fact that that's a great tool to record centrally credentials, but most people want to know what is the value of the credentials and what is the institutions, what are the institutions behind the accreditation of credentials. And of course, if you want to make it possible, higher education is very expensive here, it's very expensive pretty much everywhere. You need to have a reasonable cost structure that builds on the assets of what, either the local assets in terms of mobilizing existing facilities to the kind of assets that are required in terms of faculty, curriculum, and the likes. So we're going to have questions later, so I'm not going to develop this further, but if you have any questions on this, I can certainly address them a little later. What I want to do now is just to review with you some of the evidence-based outcomes that we have identified in the delivery of our programs. And when I said evidence-based is, the students who have gone through our education, of course, accomplish or attain some academic, but there are also some other non-academic outcomes that we recognize and acknowledge. And one of them is social awareness. And I'm not going to read it, but this is basically what the students are basically saying, that coming together in a global classroom. And let's understand, perhaps you read a student from Malawi, but most of our students are actually part of a global classroom. What does that mean? That, for example, this semester we're offering actually 2 months. Every 2 months we offer one class. We're offering interpersonal communication. In each individual class, which is a ratio of about 1 to 15, we have students who are coming or who are studying from Afghanistan, Kakuma camp, or perhaps Sri Lanka or North Iraq. So that is what basically creates a space for the students to become socially aware of themselves as well as their own situation. I have a few other dimensions that I want to share with you. Community engagement, again, another very important ethos, Jesuit education, Catholic education, and not just, yesterday we said this is really a multi-faith exercise, but at least something that characterizes is, it's a motto of Jesuit education that is men and women for others. And that means that we entice people, and the process actually of the Ignatian experience entices people to reflect about improving themselves, but also improving themselves to better their communities.
something that we also realize, and we say yesterday, and have gotten renewed appreciation, is in giving a voice to refugees and those at the margins through higher education. And literally, it's giving them a voice because many times, for many, learning English has actually become a catalyst for education. And I'm not questioning here whether you need to have it, for Francophone populations, you need to have Francophone, or for English populations. But if you go to a place like North Iraq, where we have a community learning center, and you ask students whether they want to learn Arabic, because that's the language there. Actually, North Iraq is Kurdish. They will say they feel that what will give them a voice is perhaps to learn an international language, because an international language allows them to connect with a global economy. And I have a couple more outcomes. Tertiary education also builds confidence. And this is something that we realize. And confidence, by the way, is not just built, because again, there are multiple factors in an educational experience. There is the academic, it's the courses, the materials that you receive, the books. But in our case also, in the context that we operate, we have community learning centers where people from many different backgrounds, necessities come together. And part of that building of confidence actually comes from the various interactions with each other and the appreciation that they have for each other. And perhaps the most significant characteristic that has been associated with this educational experience is critical thinking. And even beyond critical thinking, is critical thinking and decision making. Because you can be a critical thinker, but that does not lead into decisions. I recently was visiting a refugee camp, and I met one of the students who had just completed taking a class in ethics. And unfortunately, the class led this student to get divorced. We don't want to foment people getting separated, but this student said to me, it took that class for her to understand the kind of oppression and the kind of, she knew there was something not right, and then she said that she needed, not for herself, and again, we don't by no means condone family separation, but she said it was for her young girls that she needed to make a decision. And thankfully she's doing well. I mean, she was actually the breadwinner in the family, so it was not a major economic impact there. But that tells you that education actually changes and transforms lives. And when we talk about best practices, I'm sorry. Okay, that's the last one. Oh, confidence, of course, I don't need to say too much about that. Communications, confidence. Okay, that's the last one, I think. Yeah, there was one that I wanted to highlight, which is also changing roles or changing perception in roles. And there was a comment there, which you might have seen it, that said about perception of women. What was interesting about that was that it was actually made by a 23-year-old man who said that through education, there was an opportunity also to understand better relationships in families. So I'm going to leave you with that, but basically, I guess the conclusion would be that as we look at best practices in education and setting up programs, ultimately what we're looking for is to identify drivers for transformation in the lives of individuals. Transformation as well as, of course, improvements in the quality of life. Thank you so much.
First of all, let me say thank you so much to Paulina and Tony and everyone else involved in setting up this conference. It's been already an inspirational experience, and I'm just so thankful to be here. So I'm Carrie Bystrom. I'm the Vice Dean of Bard College Berlin, a liberal arts university. And I'm here today to talk about a program that I co-founded in 2015 called the Program in International Education and Social Change, or PISC, as we call it for short. And very similar to the last presentation, I'm really focusing on 3 questions. What is PISC? Why Bard College Berlin? And what are the impacts of the program on the students and on our campus community as a whole? And it's in the last part where I'll address a few specific points about teaching in particular. So what is PISC? Basically, it's a scholarship program. It provides scholarships to outstanding young people from regions of crisis. We can talk maybe a bit more about that definition in the Q&A. Who have a strong financial need, academic excellence, and a proven commitment to the public good which they plan to carry out in their career, whether that's on the international level or going back to their home countries when they're finished with their degree. The scholarship is for a 4-year BA program. It includes everything: tuition, room and board, healthcare, monthly transportation pass, books, study materials, pocket money. And I can only say that those last things, they're not incidental. They're absolutely necessary to allow students to finish their degrees. So it's expensive. I'll get to that in a minute, but it's really important to include all of these dimensions. We also offer logistical and academic support for some of the special needs or individualized needs that come along with these students. But one thing we've learned is that it's absolutely crucial as well not to create a kind of segregated, quote-unquote, refugee student community. Everything we do in terms of academic support and other support, we try to bridge between these students and all of the students so that they're directly part of the community. These students, for instance, really hate being called refugee students. We've had to rethink our language and be very careful about how the program is presented externally and also within our community. So I am happy to say it's been 3 years. We now have 32 students who are being supported by this program. We have only 300 students in total. So this is over 10% of our student body, and it's made a huge difference in our community. I have some charts here just to give you some basic information. The overwhelming majority of our students are coming from Syria, from 27. We also have some from, one from Iraq, Afghanistan, Eritrea, and then also one from Brazil and Greece. And again, this gets to questions about what is a crisis, but 30 of these 32 students have displaced backgrounds, right? They are, I'm happy to say, a third female, which we've really worked hard to get to try to have as close to gender parity as we could among this population. And they also tend to be a bit older than, for instance, the average U.S. First-year student in college. Many of them are coming from situations of interrupted university education. So they began university degrees in Syria and other places. They were forced out of those programs, and they're looking to continue their studies. To just give you a bit more of a sense of some of the students, because as we know, numbers can only tell us so much. We have truly inspirational students involved in this program. For instance, there's the co-founder of the Syrian Youth Assembly, which represents thousands of young Syrians at official UN discussions about crafting a peace process for the eventual end to the war. We have a musician from one of the most popular Syrian rock bands who's been using his music to raise awareness about the situation and has been invited to collaborate in experimental music and sound art projects at major cultural venues throughout Germany, France, and other European countries. We have a young intellectual determined to do a PhD in philosophy or political theory who missed having access to books so much when he was in a refugee camp in Germany that once he got out and got to Berlin, he started the first Arabic language library in Berlin, which has now become part of the Berlin Public Library system. This is actually a picture of the space that they created, which is now in the Central Library in Berlin, and also hosts events that are dedicated to intercultural understanding. I could go on, but I have very brief time. So, as I already mentioned, it costs a lot to support these people. Our university has given everyone at least a 70% tuition waiver, and the rest of the funds come from amazing partners who understand truly essential the opportunity of education is for each person who has a chance to access it. I mentioned just a couple here, especially people who are also involved in this network in different ways. So IIE has been an amazing partner, also the Polanski Foundation. We have fantastic support from individual donors, both of large grants, like the New York Gallery's Roland Augustine, who's been an amazing force behind this. And also, like, we've pestered our neighbors, our friends, the students, sort of everyone to give €5. And actually, number 3 of the scholarships were financed just by this kind of small scale collections that were going on. So I'm just so grateful for the network of support that's behind this program. So why Bard College Berlin? It's a bit of a funny institution and not well known, so I just bear with me as I explain a tiny bit about our institution. There's some numbers and sort of the main points up there in case I forget anything in this presentation, but basically we're a tiny and radically international diverse community. 300 students, almost 300 students from over 60 countries. That meant a lot of questions about integration or assimilation didn't really apply. Everyone at Bard College Berlin is from somewhere else, and we create our community together each semester. I think this is really important. We're a residential campus with pretty good support staff, which is really not the norm at German universities, for instance. So we have staff members dedicated to the needs of students. It's also not the norm in our German context that we teach mainly in English, which we've already talked about language and the barriers to education. So the fact that students can start studying in English right away and not spend 2 years learning German before they can really begin their degrees is crucial to them. And we're a 4-year interdisciplinary BA program. Most of the German programs are 3 years. And some of the students do want to just get through as quickly as possible, but coming from the situation these students are coming from, many of them really appreciate the extra year that they have and the extra flexibility they have to explore and move between disciplines, sort of figure out how to restart their academic careers. As a US and a German accredited university located in Berlin, we draw on Bard College in New York's tradition of being a progressive force in expanding access to education and rethinking the classroom. Those of you from this area might know about the Bard High School Early Colleges or the Bard Prison Initiative programs. We are, of course, however, located in Germany, which has been a major benefit, and we are accredited as a German university. So we give German BA degrees. We are so lucky that we can take Syrian and other students that are locked out of the United States. Some of the students, in fact, came to us precisely because they were supposed to be going to US programs. These are some students supported through IIE, and they simply could not get into the country, and they got rerouted to us. So I feel incredibly grateful to be able to provide an example of what's, my timer for 8 minutes, what's good about US education and the US system, given how horrible and cruel our migration policies are at the moment. Last 2 minutes on the impacts of the program. I think I won't say too much about this because my colleague from Jesuit Worldwide Learning has already, I think, really pointed out some of the key aspects that we have seen as well in the students that we experience. But it has, I mean, education as a degree is kind of an abstract concept, and this provides students with permanence, right? A long-term permanence that they desperately want after many difficult journeys. Emotional support, confidence, critical thinking. I can really only echo what was just mentioned in the last presentation. Perhaps it's also interesting to hear a little bit about the impacts of the program. I guess I should say we don't have any data about what the students are doing after the program because it only started 3 years ago. So the oldest students are in the 3rd year now and they won't graduate for 1 more year. What are some of the wider impacts? Perhaps that's the most relevant to this audience. As I said at the beginning, this program has totally transformed our university. For instance, there's a completely different level of engagement with the Middle East as a region and also with the topics of migration and displacement. As Professor Miriam Detian, a driving force behind the development and expansion of the program, has noted, quote, the Pi SC students' presence has a distinct and noticeable effect on college life as a whole. It connects the community to the events of war and forced migration worldwide, and especially in Syria. It makes a huge difference whether the students only learn about the war in Aleppo from the media, or whether they know someone as part of their community who's personally affected. In terms of teaching specifically, the program has also prompted massive changes. First of all, I would say a critical exploration of the language we use to talk about refugees and migration. This has been the basis of everything we've done. Secondly, reevaluation of personal lived knowledge vis-a-vis book learning through the development of practice-based courses and a turn to the arts as a tool of learning and expression across a wide range of fields. So art projects being done in political science classes, for instance. And the third thing I'd really want to highlight in this area is a new focus on equipping students to raise their voice in the public realm through journalism projects and participation in conferences, exhibitions, and media events. We talked about the responsibility of the university yesterday. We're incredibly lucky to have a next generation of leaders from Syria and other places studying with us, and they have a great responsibility and a great opportunity to change the discourse themselves without me having to speak for them. And that's what we'd really like to do with this program. And finally, I'd like to underscore that the changes haven't just been in teaching, they've also been at the institutional level as a whole. We really have become committed to scaling up from our very small scale experience with these 30 students so far. Two offshoots I'd like to mention here have been the development of an online and digital blended learning project that's supported by the Open Society Foundation that connects Bard College Berlin, Al-Quds Bard College in the West Bank, and urban refugees in Amman, Jordan. It aims to expand access to education through teaching critical thinking, writing, and also providing academic certification. And hearing of those key terms, you might not be surprised to know that we've been working with Jesuit Refugee Service and also with Chiron Open Higher Education on this project. And the second thing I'd highlight is our participation in the creation of a Mellon-funded consortium on forced migration, displacement, and education, which links Vassar, Bennington, Sarah Lawrence colleges with Bard and Bard College Berlin to shape an innovative global and practice-based undergraduate curriculum in refugee and migration studies. So I'm happy to take any questions. For now, I leave you with an image. This is an art project that was produced by an Afghan displaced student that's talking about his trip and some of the challenges of the journey to Germany. I thank you very much for your attention and look forward to your questions.
Well, let me say again how terrific it is to be here with so many like-minded people talking about something that's really worth talking about. My university, of course, is Australian Catholic University. We're a rather large university, home to about 35,000 students at the moment. And through our School of Arts, we offer something called the Thai-Burma Education Program to refugees on the Thai-Burma border in Asia. And I'm going to say more about the program in a moment, what it is, why we offer it, and I'll make some observations about the political context that we're working in, the students that we're serving, and how our program has been received, although not necessarily in that order. But before I do talk about the program, let me tell you a little bit about the historical and political context that has made this program so necessary, so important. Myanmar, or Burma as it was previously known, is located approximately 6,000 kilometres northwest of Australia. It has a population of around 52 million people, and it's made up of 135 ethnic groups. Most of our students are from the Karen ethnic minority, who constitute about 4% of the total Burmese population, and who, along with a large number of other minority groups, have waged what I would call a war of resistance against the ruling military dictatorship in Burma since 1962. As many of you would know, the civil war in Myanmar is the longest running civil war in the world. with the persecution of ethnic minorities there, described by a whole bunch of human rights researchers recently as a form of slow genocide. Some of you will know that in 2011, a fragile democracy was formed in Burma, but the transition from military regime to military-controlled democracy, if you call it that, has made very little difference in the lives of many ethnic minorities. So the political context in which we offer the Thai Burma program is violent and it's also volatile. At ACU, we therefore have to work very carefully to strike a balance between promoting our program on the one hand and avoiding inflaming political tensions on the other. So ultimately, we're guided by our mission and by our Catholic identity, which means that we try as best as we can to get on the front line, even when it's hard for us to do so. So let's think about this a little bit more. Today, just over the border in Myanmar, in the northeast of Thailand, 10 refugee camps house just over 100,000 people. Some of the refugees have been in the camps for 30 or more years, and some of our ACU Diploma of Liberal Studies students, now in their 20s, were actually born there. Thailand, like most countries in Southeast Asia, does not have national asylum systems and generally considers asylum seekers and refugees to be illegal migrants. Some primary and secondary education is available to Burmese migrants and to refugee children, provided by the UNHCR and a bunch of other charities, but higher education was non-existent in this population until ACU identified this hole in the system and moved to fill it. Since the early 2000s, more than 200 refugee students on the Thai-Burma border have graduated from ACU with a Diploma of Liberal Studies. Now, most of these students have gone on to further study at international universities, or they've gained employment with organisations that are dedicated to helping poor and vulnerable peoples in the region and further afield around the world. So they have been inspired, you might say, empowered, if you like, through access to education to serve others and to make a positive difference. And when you hear the students talk about their experience, and I have heard them talk about it, it's clear that for them, the diploma is more than just a pathway to a good job or to further study. It means transformation and changing the course of history for them, for their families, and for their communities. By offering them this opportunity, we are effectively saying to them, we see you, we hear you, you are important, you matter. And this is something that many of them have never experienced in their lives. Now, on the face of it, the outcomes of the program seem remarkable, I think so. But they're actually not that surprising. A former presidential candidate in this country put it best, I think, when she said, talent is universal, opportunity is not. Talent is universal, opportunity is not. And that's what we've sought to provide these young people. We've sought to provide them with opportunity. And we have sought to make this opportunity directly relevant to them and their communities by designing the Diploma of Liberal Studies with units or courses of study that have a heavy international development focus. So these are the same units taught at Australian Catholic University in Australia, and in many cases our students in Thailand study their units at the same time as the students in Australia via the university's online platform. In other words, we offer important opportunities for collaborative learning, for cross-cultural exchange. And I have to say, the nearly 100% retention rate for the students on the Thai Burma program actually far outstrips the statistic for our students in Australia. So we offer the diploma in two locations, at Mae Sot in the north of Thailand and Ranong in the south, and there are usually 45 to 50 students in each cohort. Hundreds of students from the Thai Burma region apply for entry to the diploma in each intake year, and they sit ACU's standard international student English entrance exams in villages and in refugee camps in Thailand. The students who gain entry then either live in the community with their families or they live in dormitories near one of our learning centres in Mae Sot or in Renault. They study their 8 subjects over an 18-month period with the support of ACU, and that's short for Australian Catholic University, with the help of ACU lecturers who travel to Thailand to teach them, and with the support also of online tutors who we employ in Thailand. We also have a number of partnerships in place that enable us to deliver the diploma as successfully as possible, and we are currently engaging with Princeton University actually about the possibility of our Thai Burma students taking a Princeton Global History unit that has been adapted specifically for refugee learners in refugee camps internationally. I'm very proud as the head of our Faculty of Arts that the fact that the program has been highlighted as a model of best practice in refugee education by organisations such as the UNHCR and the Connected Learning in Crisis Consortium. These organisations have particularly commended ACU's lived-in model of community-embedded education, where learning takes place within a Myanmar-dominated village inside Thailand, with strong community stakeholder involvement and management. They've also commended our focus on fostering cohesion in what are rather diverse student cohorts, and I'm happy to talk more about that in question and answer time. But I don't want to paint a perfect picture here and deny that there are some challenges, because the truth is the Thai Burma program does face some challenges. The difficulty of delivering education to students overseas in areas with old and run-down infrastructure, interruptions to student study from government crackdowns and natural disasters, and of course all of this is expensive work to fund, and despite its incredible importance, and I don't think I need to convince people in this room about its importance, despite that importance, it has been rather difficult for us to attract donor funding to keep the program going. But my university continues to fund the Thai Burma program because we really do believe in it. At the most basic level, the work we're doing on the Thai Burma border reflects the kind of university we are and the kind of university we continue to want to be. And at the heart of our mission and at the heart of our identity is a commitment to the notion of impact through empathy. This commitment defines us as a university and it defines us as a community. It's not a superficial marketing phrase, it's not a value proposition or anything like that. It's not a hollow ambition. It's a statement of what it is to be a university community centred on the dignity of the human person, focused on the common good. It's the promise that Australian Catholic University has made to work for the common good, to transform communities in need both in Australia and overseas. I'd like to think, I've been at ACU 4.5 years now, that we as an institution, wherever we can, stand up for people in need and for causes that matter, and that we believe in education with a bigger purpose. And I suppose this is ultimately what the Thai Burma program means to us. So again, thanks for having me here and looking forward to the discussion.
Institutions are used to serving a particular market, doing things in a particular way. And yet all of you have been able to figure out how to make institutions think differently. And I'm just wondering, like, what is the key to that cultural change? What was the reason for it, and how were you able to build momentum and support within your institutions to advance your missions?
Well, in the case of the Jesuits, as you know, many universities or Jesuits are known for education. And the Jesuits have a head. He goes by Father General. And we have been blessed with having a number of prominent present and past leaders of the Jesuits who have encouraged the various works of the Society of Jesus. The Jesuits also go by the name of Society of Jesus, to reach out, and particularly universities, to come together to pool resources. And that's basically what Jesuit Worldwide Learning is about. Many years ago, 2008, 2010, 2008 there was a meeting, 2010, we all came together and pooled resources and DAOs, and actually, amazingly enough, Australian Catholic University was one of the members or inspiration, represented by Father Michael Smith, who is here with us. But talking about innovation, perhaps another side of innovation also needs to remind us that students, very much like here at Manhattan College, also have great expectations. And when we talk about young adults, it's not just any type of education. So if I put it bluntly, if you come with technology, perhaps, I don't know if you use Blackboard here, or sometimes technology that is not engaging enough. Doesn't matter whether you do it here or you do it in a refugee camp. If you're not innovating yourself also in terms of the provision of the means of the technology, well, then you're not also going to succeed, because young adults these days are global citizens. And whether here or there, and perhaps there has been a big breakthrough, the availability of smartphones, for example, that has, in a way, created new opportunities for the delivery of education. I think I've taken a lot of time, so let me find it.
Thank you. I have to say that we've faced many challenges, but luckily institutional support was never one of them. Bard College, under the leadership of Leon Botstein, has really defined itself as, I put up there in one of the slides, a private university in the public interest. And the second that we came up with this idea, there was only complete support from within the university. The challenge for us was to find the appropriate funding structures, because we simply, unlike many of our fellow liberal arts colleges in the United States, Bard does not have a large endowment. We are not a well-resourced institution that just has money that it can use to redistribute to other things. So our biggest challenge was to work from a position where we had a lot to offer, but we didn't have enough of our own resources to offer to find those other groups like IIE and the Polanski Foundation and the people who were willing to support the program. Our situation in Germany is a bit complicated because we are a private institution. That meant that we were shut out from some of the German funding initiatives. Germany has done an amazing job as a country, sort of setting up initiatives to try to respond to the group of about 1 million people who came to Germany from the Middle East in 2015. But they really are, for good reasons, invested in the public system, and sometimes don't see how important it can be to have an institution that's flexible and can work more quickly than the public institution system can, and to do some innovative things not possible in that area. So that's been our biggest struggle, really, has been putting together the funding coalitions.
Well, I'd love to say that I did this, but I didn't. I had the great privilege of inheriting a very good program when I arrived at ACU 4 and a bit years ago, and my commitment is to try and make it as good as it can be into the future. It really is part of the DNA of the university, and in saying that, I suppose what I'm really saying is that Catholic staff and students at the university are immensely proud of the program and the contributions that it's made, and underpinning that pride is their Catholic faith. The other advantage of the program is that it plays very well with our non-Catholic staff. and students as well. So there really is a kind of universal endorsement of the program, particularly in Australia at this time where refugee politics are, well, how would I put it, fraught. That drives the sense of pride and accomplishment in the program. I've never really had to make a strong argument for why we should have the program. I think I'd have to make a really good argument for why we should not have it, and I'd lose that argument. So again, I think it's the institution driving this rather than me. And the final point I'd make is that in Australia at the end of last year, the federal government cut a lot of money from higher education, which has prompted most universities, and certainly mine, to look for ways that we can find efficiencies and make savings. And inevitably when you're the head of a school or a faculty of arts, you have to draw up a list of things that might have the spotlight on them, and this, I'm proud to say, didn't make it to the list.
So I have one more question before we open it up to the audience. And that is, at the beginning of the Iraq War, I was involved in starting up a project that we called the Iraqi Student Project. And it was designed to get students who were refugees from Iraq to the United States so that they could continue their higher education. And we had 2 people who were situated in Syria who met with students on a regular basis to prep them to then apply to colleges in the United States. And then my role and the role of others in the United States was to go to colleges and ask them if they would be willing to give scholarships to the students. And it was an amazing success. We did it for probably about 4 years. Some of the challenges that we found, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is we found that our students needed a lot more, I guess, Carrie, you alluded to this, a lot more support beyond just scholarship money and kind of getting here. We found that there were a lot of mental health issues that we needed to address. And we had a hard time. We met with the State Department to tell them about the program so that we could convince them to give our students visas. And the concern was that the students would then come and apply for asylum. So they were reluctant sometimes to give visas. And I know you mentioned that too, and why you're doing your work in Berlin and maybe not in the United States. It's because some of those migration issues. But I'm just wondering what other support, if we think of our students holistically, what other support would we need to give? And then if U.S. colleges and universities who might not create an entire program like yours but want to take a few displaced students, how should they prepare themselves so that they can help to integrate the students into their local communities?
Thank you for that question. Yes, certainly. I think our first year we had our first cohort of 4 Syrian students, and I have to admit that I was definitely not prepared for everything that needed to kind of come along with the students. We have been able to, in the meantime, develop a series of supporting structures, including additional mental health support, and to create links with specialists in refugee and displaced persons' experiences in the city of Berlin. So it's been a lot of network building. How do we get our students, we have first responder help on campus all the time, but how do we connect them into other groups who have more of a long-term approach? Otherwise, 2 other specific issues that came up, some of the students, not all of them, but some of the students needed a lot more English language support, so we had to build in a new structure for that was really made open to the entire campus, again, in the spirit of not segregating these students. And the visa situation, well, most of our students are already asylum seekers in Europe, the vast majority of them. Not all of them. We have had students coming directly from Turkey and from Lebanon, so we are working actively on a discussion about complementary pathways that's happening right now at the UN level. So we are working to get students directly out of those regions, but we're lucky, as I said, because the German government so far still is fairly open and is committed in other ways to quote-unquote internationalization of the university. And so there's some different discourses that we can draw on to make a case to get those students in. I think that the most important thing, I've already said it a couple of times in the video today, I think that we as educators, and I still, even though now I'm vice dean and I'm primarily an administrator and a project manager, I still think of myself primarily as a teacher, and I just think we really, really, really need to be open to rethinking what our classroom looks like, and to the kinds of knowledge that these students bring in with them, how to valorize it, how to make sure it's not all about, can you write a good essay? I mean, of course, ultimately, at the end of 4 years, these students are going to write killer essays, and these are brilliant students who will succeed. But especially in the first couple of years, there has to be space for developing other modes of thinking and assessment, and giving students a place to express and learn and grow and reflect, in non-traditional ways.
So do we have some questions from the audience?
Yes. Michael Smith, Jesuit Refugee Service. Thank you for your presentation, it's very impressive. What we know about refugees is that most are not coming to third countries, they are staying in host countries. The vast majority are staying in host countries, or some hopefully go home. So let's imagine someone gets a diploma in liberal studies or liberal arts or a BA online. Some countries in the Middle East, for instance, don't recognise online learning. So what's your experience, so I've got two questions. What's your experience of students who want to go on to a local university in terms of the recognition of their prior learning with one of your programs? And also, the second question is livelihoods. With having done one of your programs, how are they going for being able to put bread on the table, put food on the table? So two questions: recognition of online learning, recognition of prior learning if you're applying to a local university, and also livelihoods.
I can project. I can speak quite loud. Thanks for that question. We haven't, I can only talk about ACU here. We haven't encountered those difficulties in relation to our Diploma of Liberal Studies graduates. That might reflect, I'm sure it does reflect, in fact, the region in which we're delivering the program. It's obviously not the Middle East, and their learning has been recognised by the universities that they've gone on to in the region. I would say that a number of them have actually recently gone on to universities in Hong Kong. If you were going to ask me why exactly, well, the pull to Hong Kong would be the scholarships they were offered, but the attraction of Hong Kong is becoming more and more apparent with each cohort. In relation to food on the table, for those who don't go on to further study, a number of our students have gone on to employment with the UNHCR. Some of them have gone on to teach in communities. So, it's a hard one to assess. I suppose, looking at it from my position, I still see more often than not poverty when I look at, and yet for a number of the students who have opportunities to go on and do things that they could only have imagined. The opportunities that have come out of the program have actually been mind-boggling, and that's in terms of employment and so on. So that's now, we keep in touch with our students who graduate the program, and so we've got, coming up to about 15 years, I think, on the program. I think when I spoke about the program last year in Rome, I mentioned that it had started in 2009, and Michael rightly corrected me and said it had started a bit earlier than that. 2003. But we have stayed in touch with those students and tracked their progress. And the professional achievements have been considerable. So in terms of bread on the table, that's been one of the successes of the Liberal Studies program.
Let me only speak very briefly to the question of the recognition of online and prior learning, because we are really in the beginning phases of a blended learning project working with urban refugees in Oman in partnership with JRS, as I mentioned. What I can say is it's very clear that recognition is a crucial topic. I think I would agree again with my colleague here that it's really important that recognition comes from universities and from accredited universities, even though some of the new technologies like blockchain do provide some opportunities. And one of the aspects of the program that we're invested in is giving US and or European ECTS credits for all courses that are completed with us. So the students can get issued a transcript from Bard College Berlin, which does offer ECTS credits.
What's ECTS?
Sorry, European Common Transcript System, I think that's what it stands for, something like that. So it is accredited, that those are through the Bologna Accords, those are accredited across Europe once we issue them as an accredited institution in Germany. So there are things that universities can do if they're willing to take a stand and say this education is important. You can support that. Every university, you can talk to your leadership and say, no, we want to be involved in these programs. These classes are just as good as the classes that we're offering on our campus. The outcomes are just as good, and they deserve to have the formal accreditation and recognition for it. And I really encourage people to take up that fight at your campus. This is the first time that BARD ever gave any credit for online and blended learning, but in the context of the so-called refugee crisis in Europe, we were able to take advantage of that as an opening and make an argument for why, at least within this area, it's so important to give credit to these classes.
And just to build on that, first of all, things have changed in the education world, particularly around blended learning. In Europe, even some mainline universities, major universities that are not doing online learning, they are getting more interested in actually developing their own courses, but also regionally. So for example, just in the last couple of years in the Middle East, particularly Jordan, these days up to 25% of creditable education can be done online. Now, on a more practical side, it's perhaps unthinkable, or not unthinkable, but difficult to think that each and every diploma or course that is provided could be recognized at a national level, because as you all know, just registering one regular degree, it's so time-consuming and requires so many investments. However, what we've learned, and we've learned this actually from speaking with the students, we also have host communities. So we have refugees, and then we also have a handful of host community members. And when I have asked them, I said, for example, one student in Malawi, I said, most likely I want to get a diploma that it's an international diploma that will be recognized, but if you want to work for the government, most likely you might find some difficulties. And what I hear is that, if you want to work for the government, most likely you will pursue, you will go with a regular track in a national university. But in terms of actual expectation of a salary, she said with an international education, she can aspire to have 2 or 3 times as much. And then the other practical side is, and again, yesterday we talked about having this recognition portable in some way, and then we talked this morning about having fully vetted and accredited institutions backing up this formation. But at the end of the day, is what the students do with their education. So what I've also heard from some of the graduates is that they generally have been able to find good jobs because of the way they present themselves, because of the way they talk, because of the way they articulate ideas. So at the end of the day also, doesn't matter what kind of accredited education, a job comes after generally an interview, and it's what you can make out of what you have obtained. And finally, two quick points. Sometimes we think about getting jobs, but what we realize, particularly in the refugee camps, is that students are not necessarily getting an education to get jobs. They are actually getting an education to create jobs, because many of them are entrepreneurs. And there are so many, I can describe to you many experiences where people have actually created jobs. And the last comment I want to make is something that is, there is a major void in the literature in terms of employability, and then of course, and that is related to the service industry, that we are really providing knowledge, and no one is really looking at, for example, just to give you an example, in Kakuma refugee camp, about 80% of the education is provided by UNHCR, whereas it's supposed to be 100%. But what is happening now is that it is an informal or secondary education sector, whereby refugees don't want to have the one child in a class with 150 others, who rather have one child with perhaps 25, kind of the more regular secondary primary school systems that many of us are used to. And of course that means that the refugees themselves are paying for these services, and that all the refugees are organized in schools. So there is also, let's call it an informal space for knowledge-based type of jobs that generally are not being portrayed fully in the literature, because we always talk about somebody getting a small micro loan and then setting up a business and hopefully succeeding. Thank you.
We have another.
Was there another question from?
Okay. Can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Bob Barbusi. I'm a Manhattan College graduate, and I just saw this on this conference on the alumni website and decided to come in. I have some limited experience working with refugees in Italy. My question is really about the spectrum. When we talk about online learning, it takes in quite a bit. So I didn't, you probably didn't want to get into that level of detail when you made your presentations. We talked about distance learning and online learning. The spectrum could be anywhere from a student going online and taking a course, or a series of lessons in a course, without ever interacting with a professor or instructor, and just getting the results at the end of each lesson, all the way to some collaborative spaces where you can go online, you actually are in voice contact and visual contact with the teacher. There are breakout rooms where you could actually do breakout teamwork with some of the other students. It could be any one of you who responded to the question, but are we all looking at that kind of spectrum, or was it more defined to maybe just voice contact with an instructor at the same time, looking at some visuals on screen?
So I can touch on that very quickly. Something that I always like to explain, that we talk about online, but it's not like somebody sits and then signs on, like when you look with a game that you're with like 300 other people, or perhaps like a MOOC. In our case, we have a ratio of we start generally with 18 students per faculty member, and the communication is asynchronous, meaning it's, it happens at a different time, but it's continuous. Our courses are 2 months, so they are very intense, and there are a number of interactions, there are discussion boards, and there is extensive feedback. Just a quick note on connectivity. Connectivity is perhaps one of the major hurdles that is preventing us for engaging in perhaps using Skype or meetings or Hangouts. That's quite difficult when you when you have to perhaps give preference to downloading or uploading tests and exams.
The pilot program that we've set up, we're committed to really complete integration of the students. So the students attend classes at the same time. It's kind of challenging to explain, but it's really full. Like, there's a course that happens at one time. There's students from BARD. There's then students who are participating in different distance ways, and there's also a face-to-face meetup that's scheduled. I have to say, one of the biggest challenges of our faculty is that we didn't really know how to teach in such a context. And we're lucky to be partnering now with the Carey Institute for Global Good that's helping us really think about, instead of just having a classroom that's connected to another classroom by Skype or something else, like there's really many ways to approach this to make the most actually of the opportunities presented by distance. And I think that's something that a lot of universities will be facing as they develop these programs.
Well, ours is probably best described as a mixed model, in that we have a number of our courses in the diploma that are taught on site, which is to say in sort of face-to-face traditional format. We also have a number of courses that are delivered online by one of the academics back in Australia to the students on the Thai-Burma border, who nevertheless have support on the ground in the form of an on-site tutor, as it were, to guide them with any problems that they might have. So I would call that a kind of collaborative space. And there's a lot of technical stuff around terminology, which I'm the first to admit I'm not the world's leading authority on some of the technical language. But what we strive to do is give students as diverse an experience of learning as is possible in the fairly rigid confines of the environment that they inhabit. So, which is to say, we very deliberately have decided not to teach all the units face-to-face or all the units online. We've deliberately sought to mix it up. I mean, partly to equip them for ongoing learning and ongoing opportunities that may present in the future, whether they be in the form of further higher education opportunities or a kind of workplace context that they might move into. So that's quite an intentional thing on our part.
Other questions?
Thank you, everybody, for your presentations. They were fabulous and inspiring. I've worked in some of those contexts. I know how difficult it can be to access these populations and deliver any type of support. So the work that you're doing is fabulous. At the Carey Institute, we have a sustainable learning framework. We're really interested in learning that is sustained from person to person, generation to generation, from teacher to learner, and the learner then becomes a teacher, and on. Diana Willis, my colleague, has written a great paper on how scale and sustainability are two sides of the same coin. Without learning that is sustained, we can't scale it. I think a number of you have highlighted the problem with some of these programs is funding and scholarships are expensive. Accessing people, whether they're in their camps or bringing them to a third country, it costs a lot of money. And by that nature, it makes it difficult to scale. I'm just wondering, to what extent do you look at trying to sort of embed sustainability in your programs with your learners, so that there's some form of trickle down and return and guarantee? And I think, Armando, you mentioned that the community involvement is a really vital, important part in terms of the return of investment. We look at the scale of the problem today. We're talking about 260 million out-of-school children around the world. I'm not sure what the population of Cocoon is at the minute. I work in Dad, which is like 350,000 people. So those that we can get into scholarships are really the tip of the iceberg, if you like. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about how you do embed that sustainability and return on investment so we can scale it to the other students who maybe aren't quite so fortunate to make it into the scholarship programs.
So if I may perhaps also contextualize that in terms of the funding, because for many of us, we started this almost 10 years ago now, and there was quite a bit of interest, and generally all of us perhaps started with a big grant, and these days anything is really hard, to come by. And so one has to rethink a number of aspects, from the technology, but very importantly, and perhaps let me share what we have done. We want to make our program scalable, and what we realize is that by doing education in a place like Kakuma, for example, for almost 8 years, we have created a base. We have a human capital, which is basically the refugees themselves, who have become basically masters of hosting the offsite, the blended learning offsite student engagement and support for the courses. So we decided that perhaps what made more sense is to have the students self-organize themselves and become, instead of having layers and layers perhaps of institutions or NGOs that, as you can imagine, also take a significant chunk of resources, then trusting the students. And we're actually testing, and if you're interested, we have a wonderful video of a program in Afghanistan where this past, the beginning of this year, actually a couple of months ago, we started 4 different sites where the graduates have gone and have negotiated with communities. They have been provided in-kind, a number of facilities, and they are actually launching blended learning assisted programs. We're starting with English, and we're talking about remote places, and we're talking about, if you do a Google of some of these places where the Taliban still is active and where education for girls is still quite a big challenge. But again, I guess the question is about scalability and how can we make this sustainable. And for us, it's basically working with that human capital that has been created, the same refugees, and then making these a way also to transform the community and create an opportunity for the students themselves to actually find a way to make a dignified living by multiplying the impact of the education.
Yeah, just 2 quick things to add. It's true that individual scholarship programs like ours only help a few students, but nevertheless, I want to underscore how important each person is. I wish that we had support. We were able to support more than 30 students. What we do best is bringing students into our community, changing our community, working with them for 4 years, and really giving them the skills that they need to succeed and to make a difference on the international level or if they go back home. Now, I said that we also would like to be able to scale out, I guess. We're a small institution, so I mean that in a small way. And the way that we would like to do that is by partnering with institutions who have much wider connections and resources. We are very good at teaching writing, creative thinking, and writing, critical thinking, and sort of analysis skills. So we're now developing courses that we hope will be put into other people's programs, other people's liberal studies diploma programs, right, to take over, to share some of the burden of providing all of those basic courses. So that would be one thing that I could say. I think institutions have to know what they can do best, and then work with others who have other different access to different networks of funding and operational activities.
I'd agree with that, and on a slightly depressing note, I'd also say that institutions need to recognise things that they can't possibly do as much as they would want to. So, I mean, I've today talked about the 45 to 50 students that we let in to the diploma every 18 months, and that's terrific, but hundreds more apply and don't get in. And I would love to admit all of those students or prospective students, because I'm sure they would be very worthy members of our program, but it's a struggle to run the program for 45 or 50 students. I mean, one of the ways I suppose we address that is we do partner with a few institutions. I mean, York University, for example, delivers in partnership with us, but one of the online units in the diploma, we're currently exploring some possibilities. I think I mentioned in my talk earlier with Princeton University to embed a kind of core global history unit that Princeton has developed specifically with refugees and refugee education in mind. We have a partnership with Palms Australia and so on. But it's not to put too fine a point on it, but it is expensive, and you've got to want to do it, and you've got to be prepared, not only prepared to pay the cost, but enthusiastic about it. I think I said last year when we met in Rome, some of us, that a story remains firmly with me of someone at my university saying, look, we're in a difficult higher education environment at the moment. You know, money's tight. Is this a good investment? What is the return on your investment? And I said, well, it depends on how you define investment. I've never been much of a speculator, and that's why I've got no money, but or entrepreneurial in that sense. But if we're talking about deep investment and investment in people, and you know, I come back to that phrase, which I find not at all gimmicky and genuine in its wording and what it's intended to be, impact through empathy. That's sort of what we do, and that's a good investment.
All right, so that's going to have to be our last question because we're already over time.